Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and most importantly, for taking the time to understand the critical nature of audiences and how this work should and will continue, as we know that the global majority in nature is diverse. And thank you so much, Sharon, for that kind introduction. I'm going to step to the side here, but as she mentioned, my name is Frazer Haynesworth, and I have the privilege to serve as the Executive Director of Impact and Inclusion at Interpublic under the leadership of Channing Martin. And we are excited to share this because essentially at the top of the year, and I'm going to move closer to the data shortly, at the top of the year, we made an observation when the executive orders started to come out in the US that there were a lot of brands that were operating from a place of fear and in some of their reactions. And one of the things that came up to me was, in my mind, I was like, there is a voice that is missing in this conversation, and it's the consumer voice. And isn't that the most important part of this conversation? Because they are not only who consumes this product, but these are the employees, this is the workforce. I was like, so I think that we need to pause a little. And in our role, as Channing would say, we are in a place, position, and privilege where we provide guidance of thought leadership to our leaders so that they understand how to best inform clients when they come to them. And as you know, if you've ever worked in agency or marketing, emotions is not something that is currency in our industry, right? Currency to us is data, is insights, is results. So we immediately went back to say, well, how can we do that? So with that said, I know that the lighting is not going to be the best here for you to be able to see, but thank you for the introduction of the panelists, and we could move on to the next slide. Oh, you don't have the slides. Oh, I thought that our team had sent them over. So I will be talking over some of the content, but essentially there were three things.
Emailed them, yeah.
It's okay. I'm gonna follow with these, yeah. But there are three things that we were solving for. One is DEI still important, and what does it mean in different regions? We didn't want to take a position of assumption. And one of the things that I told Channing is, I don't want people to think that because this is the line of work that we do, that this is self-serving. If this is not important, and if it's changed and evolved as all things do, that's what we want to do. We want to share what that evolution looks like and what does that look like in different countries. So I wanted to share that with you, that we went in from an objective place. The other thing is that we wanted to see what is the impact that takes place when these shifts have taken place at corporate. So a little bit about my background. I actually studied journalism, and like any other thing that you've done, it never leaves you. So the first thing that I said is, I want us to take an investigative approach. I said, it's going to be a mix of social listening to see what happens when these brands have made this announcement, and kind of follow them a little bit to see how does the conversation continue, who's having that conversation, what generation are those individuals that are having that conversation. So that was part of it. Then the investigative part of it is, let's look at the letters, because even though I love media and that's where I've spent decades right now in my life, I know that sometimes the story could be a little skewed. So we wanted to see what are they not saying. So we started to look for letters from shareholders to CEOs that said, what are they saying? Because that's like I said, because at the end of the day, those people that are on those boards, they hold a lot of power. And a lot of the times they're given those roles because they do speak for members that are the constituents, right? So I was like, what are they saying? And we did get a grasp of some of those letters, which was incredibly helpful also. And there was another component that was really interesting to us, which is the multi-generational component. I am in my late 40s, and my deepest admiration right now is for the younger generation around how they are not just taking a back seat on anything. I started to study them deeply when they elected a president in the United States, and I said, wow, because at that time the establishment wasn't necessarily supporting, I'll say by name, it doesn't matter, but the establishment was not supporting President Obama. They took over social media and they taught us how to build a constituency base, right? So after that, I said, okay, I have a lot of respect for y'all, and I'm gonna look at y'all even a little bit closer, right? So we wanted to see what are those multi-generational shifts in how this is taking place, because it's important. I don't know if social has something to do with that, but we have built a habit of speaking of things in a monolithic way. Like, oh, people that are like this, they do that. That's actually not true. There is no such thing as these types of people. Even when you say these, there's so many layers of complexity to these, right? So I was like, so I want to unpack these, and I want to unpack these in different countries, right? And then there's another component here that's critical, which is why we developed this further relationship with GLAAD Media Institute. They were saying, hold up. These, once again, includes a lot of members of the LGBTQ plus community, and we want to know within that intersectionality, how is that group impacted? That's an important part of the conversation, because once again, these people are your consumer, are your children, are your spouses, So we said, let's make sure we understand what the constituency looks like in a holistic way. So one of the things that we found out from this study was that 56% of consumers agree that DEI initiatives in the workplace, that they are a good thing. 60% agree that efforts to create more diverse, equitable, inclusive entertainment media is a good thing. That is 60%. 58% agree that brands' efforts to make products and advertising more diverse, equitable, and inclusive is a good thing. And 42% of consumers agree with all of these three things, and 80% of consumers at least agree with at least one of them. So why is this data important? I like to humanize and activate data, right? So a client comes to you, a brand, and they say, hey, this world is anti-DI. Should we be doing that thing? And then my reaction is like, are you anti your consumer, right? Because, and then, or even when they say, I've dealt with many brands along the way, and they'll say, one of our goals is that our demographic is aging, and we want to reach a younger demographic. Do you know what that younger demographic looks like? It's first Black, and then after that, it's Latino. So it's being able to grab this data that allows them to understand what this data means to them. And so, like, I think most of the people that know me and speak to me intimately about this, I never really loved the term DI. That's just a Carol thing. I never really loved it because I've been doing audience work for 26 years. So that's like me, like I'm Black from Honduras. Like when people say you're Afro-Latina, I said yes, since the 90s, but I was born in the 70s, so before then, what was I?
Right.
So all of these terminologies that all of a sudden make who I am, they do something to me. Maybe not to the rest of the people, but I'm just kind of like who I was like when I was born, and like, or why I went about this, rather than the terminologies that have been built that evolve in time. So that's why I think it's not a DEI conversation, it's an audience conversation. But in terms of what we refer to it as a group, we would refer to it as DEI, right? Now I want to now look into the intersectional demographic, right? And generation, like we said. 55% of Gen Z adults are worried about how the recent political pushback against DEI versus baby boomers who under-index in concern. So that's important. Right? And I'm going to go a little deeper on that. But what I'm saying is when they say, oh, that group doesn't like this, just know that if they're Gen Z, 55% of them are in favor of this work. And yes, you are absolutely right. If your product is towards baby boomers, they do under-index on considering this to be a priority. So you're going to serve your audience. I'm not telling you not to do that. That would be totally irresponsible. Now, marginalized, right? When we look at communities like the Black, the Asian, and the LGBTQ plus adults and individuals with a disability, or someone that has a loved one that is either a member of this community or that their relative has a disability, like I said, they're more likely to support DEI. And Channing talks about that in some of the recent conversations that we've been having around this. That is a new sentiment. People like Megan and I that have been doing this work for a long time of analyzing data, we will tell you that that's a new, this whole knowledge of how we behave, it's actually pretty new. Before, a lot of the data was like census. And it was like there's 20 people in that part that look like this, and then there's another 30 that live here. And no one really grabbed the data and made it actionable. Well, what we see now that is exciting for those of us that are data geeks is that now we're seeing what are the sentiments of the relatives. And isn't that logical? I have a daughter, and believe me, she's only 9. But if she was a member of the LGBTQ+ community, everything, whatever you say, you would be saying it about me. Isn't that like the natural tendency of humans, right? So we're now tracking the relationship sentiment, which is necessary because brands, don't they always say they want to be smarter? But to be smarter, you have to understand the data and understand, and once again, like you like to use the term, humanize the data. It's humans. It's not these random numbers that are coming out of nowhere. Now, there's 2 scenarios that we would like to talk about when they remove DEI. We have, we looked at one that has to do with a social media organization, a quick service restaurant, and a big box retailer. That's going to be one of the scenarios. We can't really say the brand names, but some of it just, you could kind of think about it. Then scenario 2 is brands that reaffirm DEI and align with corporate policies. And this is a franchise coffee and a shoe brand. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a little game that's going to say what happened to one and what happened to the other. Some of it is logical to y'all, but I have to say one of the points that makes me very proud, I do think I do have a bias for very smart people that like to have smart conversations, and I consider Interpublic to be a smart place. You all now know what's happening. I have a secret. We've been knowing since February, because this report, we got approval from the global CEO of Mintel to start running this, because the way data works, we would have had to wait much longer. They'll tell you, well, it costs this amount of money. The researchers are currently tied up doing this. And then what I did was that I picked up the phone and I called all my research friends like Megan knows and Nikki and said, listen, this is an industry priority. If we wait until November to figure out what people are thinking, brands will have made ginormous errors, assuming this. So I'm asking you to build this, I refer to it as a coalition, where we all look at this data and we say anything, because I need you all to think about this. A lot of this shifts dramatically started to happen as of January, right? So whatever data we had last year is irrelevant, and our business is all about context. So I didn't have to sell it to anyone. Everyone said we agree, and we started to look at what resources we had, both financial, and also part of this research has to do with where individuals are, what's their scope, like where can they get data, because we do have global data that is also interesting and important. But we needed to figure out who can do what and where now. Right? So that was part of the assignment. So I'm sorry? Oh, excellent. Look at that. So these were the 2 scenarios that I was speaking. Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. You notice ever since I said now, things just started to happen like that. I wish it happened on every aspect of my life, but it doesn't. So when we look here, for example, we wanted to share this about the critics of DEI. My husband's workplace has gone to the extremes. It's almost impossible to fire anyone of color, LGBTQ+, but my husband, who is a straight white male, can get fired for anything. This, I feel, is reverse discrimination, said a woman that was white, age 45 to 54. And then proponents of DEI, these are some of the things that we saw that was coming up. They said, DEI means to me that every type of person, male, female, trans, has the opportunity to qualify for any position as long as they are qualified or skilled. I think that any company who is pulling back on DEI should be fined, said a woman that was black, age 45 to 54. So I am not implying, I want to say this out loud, that this means that everyone within that age group of that group thinks like that. But I have to tell you, and I think that you all, with your real, true friends, have heard that, right, from either side. but it goes to what we wanted to showcase there is the polarization of the conversation. And I think what we've become now is it's perhaps more comfortable to have the conversation. And we saw that comfort come to play in time. So with that, let's go that way. Let's see. No, we're not there yet. Let's see. Can someone help me, please?
Can we get some help with the slides?
Yes, because this is set forward and it's doing something completely different. Let's see.
Can we
There we
see
go.
what they see?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I love this.
Yeah, it's good.
I love this automation. You sure we can't take this back home? So these are the two scenarios. No, I think there's something where that's where I'm going to put this down. That has done what it's going to do. Let's see. We had a backup. So what I wanted to share with you is that we do have groups that are supporters and non-supporters. And that's the other piece that we tried to understand. Supporters, what we know about them is that they are, once again, it's the younger generation, right? And the individuals that we said that they are Black, Asian, or a member of their family is of a minority or disability group. And then we have the non-supporters, who they do skew a little bit older, and they do skew white, male, but that does not mean that all white males think like that, and I just wanted to say that, right? And there's a part of the global component that is the other part that I wanted to share with you very briefly, because we do need to go to the panel conversation. That for the global component, we wanted to know, what does DEI mean in different places? And I want to share at a very high level, what did we learn? In countries that are in Asia, identity is everything, and self-identity. So how it shows up is their ability to showcase their identity because of the many cultures that exist within there. So that's how we need to understand. So let's, like I said, the word DEI, so DEI there means that, their ability to do that, right? Then when we look at Latin America, we saw a very interesting dynamic, that we saw that there is a strong fear of the role of technology and how it leaves certain groups behind. And a part of me said smart. They're not totally off. There's a huge marginalization that takes place because of technology. So that's kind of like the leading conversation that we see there. And then Mexico, I kind of always pull Mexico apart or separate from the data, because in Mexico, what we saw once again is more of a social, not necessarily economic, but just social behavior and how that identity shows up. And then in Europe, I saw something that did not surprise me to some degree, because do you know that the UK is actually going down in terms of the work of DEI? And then we see Germany, out of all, experiencing a spike. And then there was something else that I needed to share, because I want you to be able to have this informed conversation. A lot of people think that the murder of George Floyd is where DEI began. Well, I have to tell you that I have the data. That's actually not true. The growth since the murder of George Floyd, we tracked 4 years prior to the murder, and to date is actually a very slight minor change of an uptick since the murder. So that tells you that this is really a language issue, you know, like it's really a communication issue, because most countries were already in the practice of doing this work, of looking, and y'all know I'm not making this up, we were already looking at the numbers based on gender. So I think it's all about packaging. So we're actually unveiling this study here. Upon us starting this study, all of the major trade, like people were looking for us, and I told Channing, I said, let's just wait a minute. I said, we want to be the ones to manage how this information comes out, and we thought that this would be the perfect stage to do that. So I want to ask you briefly before I take my seat and communicate with other people and be social, right? How many of you are surprised by any of the data that I've shared? Exactly. Now, the other thing is, does it seem like for some reason, as it is, the narrative is being spinned, right? So that's the purpose of this data, is that we are a data industry. We are a numbers industry, right? So when you grab the data and you put it in front of our leaders and our global business leaders, then it becomes something that they understand in their language and that they can apply. So I hope that you enjoyed some of it as much as I've enjoyed working with everyone putting this together with GLAAD and with Mintel. I placed these cards here and I said, they're not gonna fall.
Did they fall?
And what did they do?
Oh, no.
That's okay.
Should have taken it from you. I got you some water, too.
I hope it didn't like mix them up, because that would be
Carol, we will dance. It's okay.
You see this?
Yeah.
Let's give Carol a round of applause. That was great. Can you take these?
If you don't mind. Sorry, just give me 1 minute as I try to find our questions here. There we go. If you don't mind, I would like to start with Nikki, because what is the key positioning or a recommendation or approach you would like to share with brands when addressing the LGBTQ plus community today in light of this timely research?
Yeah, there's a few things. So first, I encourage brands to expand the way in which they think about our community. Oftentimes, we see ourselves represented in partnered or romantic roles, but we are parents and colleagues and neighbors and doctors and teachers and professionals, right? We need to see more of that representation. We also need to expand outside of sexual orientation and also thinking about the gender piece. There are many gender non-conforming folks. It's actually a fast growing consumer group that extends to the hetero community as well. We can do better building gender neutral products and services and really embracing that community, which is a part of our community. I also advise that brands think about donating to advocacy organizations like GLAAD. Research shows that consumers really want brands to support the advocacy organizations that support the communities they belong to. So, you know, that donation can look like many different things. I have brands that support our research and programs. I have other brands that really want to be visible and connect with LGBTQ consumers, and so they sponsor events and they build really meaningful activations. And then the last thing I want to mention now is inclusive efforts, inclusive internal efforts are really, really important. Your employees, Kara, I believe you said this, your employees are your consumer and your ambassador. So make sure that you're investing in your ERGs, you're really looking at inclusive policies, provide fertility treatments or gender affirming care, you know, not fertility treatments, but, you know, fertility benefits so that we can get fertility treatments. I went through IVF. I have a beautiful child with my wife. It's changed my life. I stayed at a corporation for 8 years because of those fertility benefits. So remember how important that is. Gender affirming care benefits. Also, you know, really think about, you know, the terminology you're using in the workplace and making sure your executive leadership and your teams across the organizations are equipped with supporting especially underrepresented talent.
Love that. Thank you so much. And Channing, what inspired you to support this research project and give it the priority you have given it within IPG and within the industry?
Sure. Thanks, Carol. Hi, everybody. I'm Channing Martin, the Chief Diversity Officer at IPG, and I get to work with Carol every day. And, you know, I think, you know, first thing I would say is Carol really inspired the research. And I think in part because we really think, I'd say progressively, about the way we engage with this work. I, too, like Carol, have never liked the term DEI. I started doing this work under the Obama administration when, you know, equity actually wasn't really even a part of the conversation. We were playing around with acronyms like diversity and inclusion, and then belonging, and then equity, and then, you know, affinity, and then other things. So this has evolved over the past few decades, actually. To Carol's earlier point, it's not new. And because this work continues to evolve, we wanted to evolve the strategy here at IPG as well. We wanted to create something that we thought was missing. One, we saw a focus that was very US-centric. We have an organization of 55,000 plus people globally. We needed to create a strategy that was attractive to all of our talent and that included all of our talent. We saw too many spaces where the conversation was siloed. And I mean, how many of you, no matter what businesses you lead or what strategies you're implementing or a project you're working on, if it's siloed and you don't have the engagement of people, it's really hard to be effective. And so we wanted to design something that felt really global, that anyone could be a part of that work and thought they were a part of it, and also something that was really sophisticated with data. Not only data backed, but that we could use data to measure the efficacy of the strategy itself. And then last but not least, the biggest piece that was missing was that to integrate the work into the business. So we kind of rethought the way we were going to do this, how every function at an organization has to support the business, no matter what. Our people are incredibly important. They are our most important asset. And so we understand the imperative behind the work that we do, but we knew that we were missing a component of growth, impact, and acceleration with this work that the work we do provides. And so we thought of really keen opportunities to partner with organizations that allow us to get better information, data around audiences. We look at growth opportunity audiences as ways for our business to accelerate. And data it's frequent and fast and changing rapidly. So we knew that we needed a team, and we chose our own to be that center of excellence for the business to really keep in touch with and understand growth audiences. So that's what really led to this research and this partnership that's going to continue to expand, because we'll identify other audiences, other communities, other regions to then grow the conversation.
Thank you so much, Channing. Channing has truly been a champion of this work, and she's really ensured that not only our leadership, but that our most critical partners understood and amplified this. So thank you so much for that. Harjas, as a cultural strategist and storyteller, what would be your observations to share on how content creators would apply these types of findings around the imperative of addressing audiences with intentionality in light of the context that we're living?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, everyone. So my name's Harjas. And great question, actually, and very prevalent. My co-founder of Understory, which is a climate media platform, Nia Haleti, she just had to leave, but she was here. She's been doing content creating for, I would say, over a decade, and I think she's a great example of using her platform for intentionality. So she storytells about Indigenous communities throughout India and how, you know, they do their weaving textiles, they do their way of living through food, culture, etc. And our slogan has become kind of cultural sustainability is a human right. And she's done it through intersectionality and depth, and that's what's resonating with audience, because when she's worked with Indigenous communities, she's gone out to find maybe someone that wants to speak also about their queer identity within the community. And so the story becomes even deeper because there's layers to people, and I think that's how we should view the stories and the content, you know, that we're putting out there. And I think beyond that, an important statistic that you did use is that 42% of consumers nowadays do care about DEI, so we need it to show up in our stories. But again, the missing links are intersectionality, in my opinion, and depth. And so I think everyone needs to understand in what layers, I guess, they can show up and how they storytell that, and which is super important. And another interesting statistic I actually found out of your wonderful reports is that 68% of folks are finding that brand campaigns are actually failing to meet the standard because intersectionality, again, is not being shown, and the depth of, you know, these folks' stories, community stories are not being shown. And I think brands really need to stop talking at people and working with the communities that they're talking about. And again, I think Neha does a really good job of that. So not just storytelling, hey, these are the communities in Jharkhand that are, you know, doing XYZ techniques in climate innovation. She's actually going out and working with them, highlighting their voices, filming the pieces of content with them, so their faces are there and shown. So representation isn't us telling people what it is or, you know, companies doing it. It's actually the communities that should be leading it and be visible, if anything. And I mean, it did very well in her career. It showed up in Vogue India, for example, because it resonated with communities. So again, yeah, we need depth and intersectionality, and it doesn't mean another Indian dude showing up in an ad. It's maybe a queer Indian dude showing up in an ad and representing more, folks within the communities. So yeah, moving beyond just the typical, I think, stuff that we see.
Thank you so much, Harjas. And what she's referring to is a highlight that came out of it that says that in the midst of the context right now, a lot of brands are going back to monologues rather than dialogues with communities. And it's exactly like you said, I'm not quite sure that that's what wasn't working before. So, yeah. But thank you so much for sharing that. And with that, I'm going to go to Nikki first and then Channing to tell us, we've also seen that there's the difference in age groups, as I spoke to about, they respond very differently, not only to this topic, but to messages and campaigns. Are there any stories you can share about how work or messaging may have landed perhaps very well with one generation and completely different with another? And we could start with you, Nikki, and then come to Channing.
I mean, the use of the term queer, it's just simple. Yeah, we kind of have a difference of opinion when it comes to generation. So younger folks, I'm going to claim to be among that, that group as a 40-year-old. Millennials and Gen Zers, we prefer queer. It allows for more fluidity. For example, I'm married to a non-binary person. Identifying as a lesbian wouldn't make sense for me. I also have dated trans folks, cis folks, non-binary folks. I really want to allow for that fluidity, and I think that it's more inclusive. A lot of younger generations believe the same. Older folks experience like a negative connotation associated with the word queer, the term queer, and so they prefer gay, lesbian, bisexual, or the acronym LGBTQ. With that, like at GLAAD, we want to be as inclusive as possible. So we do recommend that brands use LGBTQ if they're trying to reach a broader audience. But if you're trying to reach a younger audience, I would suggest you use queer.
I love that. And that's actually a very good specific example of what we're talking about, because then there's that magic word that we always say in our industry, conversion. We want to convert. Well, to convert, it has to resonate, right?
1000%, yeah.
Right. So I love that. Channing, tell us an example that you might have experienced.
Nikki's example is way better than mine. Now I don't.
Don't do that, Channing. Don't do that.
No, it's really great. And I'm going to add something to this. What we find internally as well, we talk about our workforce are also consumers. When we do our internal listening strategies, our Belong survey, that comes out in the data as well, not only in the data, but even in the creation of the survey. So we use our business resource groups to advise on our questions, what we ask, what we don't ask. And you'll find, we'll often be really struggling, not only generationally, but regionally and by country. You'll have, a group of folks in Plus, which is our LGBTQ plus BRG in the UK, has a really different opinion than perhaps the Plus group, in Brazil. And there is this challenge. So we even struggle with it as practitioners to meet the needs of all people, as do brands. So I think we're not saying it's easy, but I do think being armed with the information and the context and nuance about people and their complexities is really important. That spans just beyond, I think, the conversation often leads to kind of class or economic status and the way people behave in their purchasing decisions. But within one household, you could be using different terms, like what might be attractive to your teens might be queer, but what might be attractive to you as a parent might be LGBTQ, and vice versa. So I think that's really fascinating. I really like that example. We had been talking a little bit about, if you look at some brands who have made some, big mistakes, and we could talk about that, but we thought, okay, what about some brands that have really tried to think differently about how they understand their consumers? And we were talking about Walmart, who's, rapidly evolved and changed and grown. And I'm not really talking about Walmart's value system, that we could have a different conversation about that. But, when they introduced organic, it had a ripple effect across retail and across markets and really changed their business model. It changed the global economy in one decision in launching organic, right? And so what they did that because they understood that they had a very large audience and consumers but that they were nuanced and they wanted different things and they needed different things. They did that when they introduced kind of urban grocery stores. They did that with the introduction of organic. They had to understand, in order to get people across 5 generations in one place at the same time, they really had to tailor and reach that audience by speaking their language and meeting them with their needs. So I think we're talking about a more sophisticated use of data that does speak a language of intersectionality and humanity versus fitting into a check the box category, which is the challenge that DEI now faces itself, is that I think folks are really tired of being stuck in boxes, and the practice is quite evolved, but I think the nomenclature and the communication around it confines it into these boxes, and it's really not.
Yeah, and I think I would like to add to that, the brands need us. There's a particular, so I probably should say that again. The brands need you. Because sometimes I feel like when we are working in the organizations, we feel like we're there to do what is given to us, but in reality, we're actually there to give something that can transform the institution and the work that they do. There's a particular example that just came to mind where I think it was around the pandemic that I was dealing with a brand that gave me easily 50 pages of a report that said that their issue was addressing in health, like when it came to vitamins and such, people of color, just in general. And I was like, wow. And they've been around. This is, if I said the name, you would fall out. I mean, they've been around for a long time. And I said, so what you have is a strategy and a marketing problem. I said, because in your mind, your general audience is who is making sense for you. I said, I'm being both Black and Hispanic. I can tell you that as a Black woman, anything that says shea butter, I'm buying it, and then I'll figure out if it's real. But and then the same thing with being a Hispanic woman. There are a lot of qualities and things that are in the products that you will automatically buy it. Like, I'll give you a very example, ginger root, or if I could speak about like Honey Oats, that was one of the brands that I worked on. And Honey Oats does tremendous with Hispanics, because in Hispanic culture, eating oats is a part of the culture. And it's something that all children are given since very young, and it's gonna make them grow older and stronger, allegedly. I'm not know if it's true. But all to say that the fact that that brand could think that they have an issue, I was like, no, you have a communication issue. You don't know how to extract because you sell all these vitamins and and this is all happening at the time of COVID-19, which is even further tragic. I was like, you actually don't even have to sell to these communities. Those communities are already trying to survive based on vitamins and based on supplements, but the fact that there's a disconnect, that's what I'm saying. So I want you to, I only share that context with you to say, I want you to, if you're not already doing that, I want you to redefine your own purpose in the roles that you have, because it's valuable and transformational to the brand's good understanding of who we are as consumers and how we consume products, right? And with that, I'm going to go to Harjas, because you live in the UK, and you could give us a sense of how these cultural narratives around inclusion is evolving from your perspective globally.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually recently moved to the UK temporarily because I actually did human rights studies at Columbia University, and because of my work there, I decided that it was no longer that safe for me. So I'm currently based in the UK, but definitely have the Canadian, both American, and now the UK perspective in terms of inclusion. And I'm going to make a statement as more, I think, of an Indian woman in the diaspora, and I think it's quite relevant, but I think culture is no longer a Western import, because the diaspora is here. We're working with brands where, there's women like you at the helm leading what inclusion and diversity looks like. So I think it's quite interesting, and we're seeing the conversations evolving from being baseline, the checkbox method, to actually real tangible change and actions following through ERGs. So I think there's power in the diaspora. We're seeing it being represented in content creators, media, brands, even in the human rights conversations as they're happening in Climate Week in London, even here in Cannes. There's smaller conversations like this, but the diaspora is really taking the lead. And we're here, we're speaking. I think the main sentiment is that inclusion is no longer a thing that we have to see as secondary because we're here, we're existing, and it's no longer this idea of importing culture from another place. We just have to speak to the people right beside us.
Actually, Channing could speak to that about when we unveiled the study to the global leaders, and what was the reaction, from the other countries?
There was a few reactions. I think the non-US reaction was one of like, please don't bring this mess over here. Like, we don't know what you all are doing, but don't disrupt. Like, we don't want to see that Western influence come and disrupt the conversation we're having in our particular country, insert any country name, and the way we think about diversity and identity and what's important to us and what we value. The workforce, globally was really worried that we would make some sort of announcement and say, like, we're stopping DEI work or insert whatever the way they call it in that particular region. And there was this real fear and trepidation on the side of our workforce, but also on our brands, our clients. They were really concerned, and so we thought we were actually really surprised by that response. Yes. And we started to see some shifts globally as well, both positive and negative. But I think there's also this kind of a reckoning around, like, we don't have to wait for the U.S. to do something, and we could do things on our own in the way we need to do it that speaks to our communities and our cultures and our languages and our identities. And I think that's really exciting. Just the idea that we could evolve a DEI practice from a Western perspective with the influence of other countries, I think is also an awful idea apparently, but is also really exciting. So yeah, I thought that was super interesting. The other takeaway from that conversation, we presented the research to our global business leads. They almost, exhaled during the conversation to say, okay, so I was scared to bring this up. We don't know what to do. We've been in a state of paralysis. We're trying to figure out what's going to happen. This is incredibly helpful and reinforces us in the conversations we're having with clients. Like, don't jump the gun. This is not a scary topic. This is sensationalism as a lot of it. And these are some things we can do about it. And this is also what your consumers are saying about your brand. And I think that was incredibly valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Channing. And I think that for a minute, I feel like the whole world has to pause and go on a vacation because they have to think about it. So they work so hard to build global brands, but you're allowing your sentiments of one region to inform as if most of these brands are global, right? So that's something to think about also, right? So I thought that was also something that was kind of like surprising that they were so, that their fear was that it went over there. So I think what we want to make sure that this conversation and as we go into this open conversation gives you an opportunity, and hopefully that these are tools and we give you data that can help you advocate and sponsor this data in the work that you do. So with that, I want to ask every member of the panel to briefly say how it is that, because this conversation, by the way, the bad news is it's going to continue to evolve. I mean, it's just not going to stop where we are right now. So what do you think that we can do to help brands in continuing to resonate with their consumer base within the context that we're in helping to make sure that they thrive in the environment in light of the conversation that we have? If you don't mind, we'd like to start with you, Nikki.
Work with advisors, trusted advisors, advocacy organizations that do the work and know the community best. I'm just going to insert this. You didn't necessarily ask, but marginalized groups are intentionally fighting back on exclusion with our spending power. Like, brands, you might not care about making us feel like we belong, but you care about profitability. The LGBTQ community has spending power of $1.4 trillion in the US. So you want our money? You want our support? You're going to have to support us. It's a demand. We're not playing games. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Harjas.
Yeah, amazing. I really agree. I mean, coming from both the public and private background, is to really support nonprofit organizations, advocacy organizations. And beyond that, I think brands and corporations need to understand that right now, back to the global question as well, that political backlash is real, it's global, but so is resistance from the diaspora and from the communities. So work directly again with the community, seek representation from them, and yeah, represent their stories and show up. And I think that's how authentically, I guess, the content will connect, brand campaigns will connect, and ultimately that relates to profitability as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Channing.
I'd say, I think maybe two things. It's one, if the identity of a particular group of people isn't going to move you to change your business model, I think what the data has revealed is like you don't have to belong to that identity to give a shit about this conversation and this work. I think this is like a concept that brands are just starting to understand. It's like, I don't have to be queer to care about how an organization represents queer people in their marketing, or how the products that they create or services they offer supports queer people. And so I'm excited for that to continue to evolve and grow. I think the other piece is probably a little bit more provocative. I know we're recording, but Carol knows I will, whatever. I think we've got to just move out of this, doing DEI work is the right thing to do. It's like, from a corporate America perspective, I just don't know how sustainable the right thing to do is in a business that is designed to create shareholder value and profitability and revenue. That's what we go to work to do. I don't work in the same space that Nikki works. Our visions may be very similar, but our operating principles are designed very differently on purpose. And lean into that. I think it's okay to be who you are, whatever brand it is. Own who you are, your vision, your identity, and what you're trying to accomplish. But what you need to understand then is that people drive your business, and the people you're selling to also drive your business. So if it's not about the right thing to do, that's okay. That's actually going to, I think, make this conversation easier. You said that the trillions?
1.4 trillion.
Oh, okay, with the T, trillions,
Yep.
okay? So, what, a quarter of the world people identify as disabled. The majority of us will become disabled if we live long enough. The world is increasingly globally Black, brown, and everything in between across the globe, right? We can insert whatever the case may be, and you talk about an upcoming generation that creates a new language to define value systems overnight that will be speaking in a totally different language, and then the evolution of artificial intelligence over the next 10 years, we'll be having a totally different conversation. So if you want to do good business, then figure out how to include everyone in that business model, and I think a lot of these conversations will shift.
I totally agree. And I think with that, I want to open it up to any questions that you all have. But I can tell you that in the conclusion that I have from this conversation and from even what drove this study is that because we are in the situation that we are in, we also have to be as intentional as possible for it to move forward. So some of the little things that we can do is, like, for example, if someone asks you something and you're there, is try to not speak from an audience of one, because there's not a whole lot of value to that, especially in our industry. It's really about what the audience, so utilizing this language, I hope, of the consumer, and that really, because I think it becomes an act of resistance when you give them data and you say, would that resonate with the consumer? Right? Would that resonate with the employees that work here? So I just wanted to share that briefly as the key to this is not, like I said, I don't think that we're in the business of creating counter narratives, but we're in the business of creating smart narratives that then can be utilized to have informed conversations. And you see, like, even that, you know, that there's a different angle to it. But I want to hear more about how are you doing it, and any questions that you might have on how you're applying it.
All right, well, I'm gonna turn it over to my good friend Crystal, because we've had this conversation multiple times, and we've talked about, we realize that for many of us, this is a very personal conversation. But when we're in businesses, that's a different conversation. And one of the things that I love that Crystal and the digital group does is focus on growth audiences. Right. All of the things that you've talked about, $1.4 trillion, what business wants to walk away from that? So I'm going to turn it over to her to share her perspective, and then we're going to come back to something that I want everyone to discuss.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi, Crystal Foote founder of Digital Culture Group. So we saw the passion with a lot of agencies and brands, making sure that they reach audiences, making sure they drive ROI. But there was really a white space in the industry. And that white space was that it was hard for them to have the data because the infrastructure is antiquated in terms of activation and programmatic targeting. So we went from broad-based demos back in the 1960s because it was easier for reporting and measurement to now broad-based audiences. So if you're Black or you're part of the LGBTQ+, people were saying in the industry, oh, you all consume the same content, right? And they're not looking at the segments because of the different types of layers that particular audience has to effectively and successfully reach them. So we developed an AI tool, and it is really based on audience resonance, making sure that depending on what your brief is, what your RFP is, who you should be really reaching, what's going to drive the ROI and the performance. And so I want to get your perspective because, again, sometimes the research does not always equal ROI because the infrastructure is broken. How are you connecting the research with the output of showing someone an ad?
That is part of my job, right, Jenny? So-
Well, Carol, how would you get next? We're working on that.
Yeah, so that's what we're working on. We're essentially working very closely with our internal research and data partners so that we can build more sophisticated and integrated models to make sure that this is not something that happens in the silo. Because what we notice for many of you that work in networks is that you might have one agency that totally has a system, and then you have one that has less of a system. So we at Interpublic have built strong entities like Axiom and Kinesso and Magna, that is a strong research partner of the entire network, and we continue to see how can we make this something that's available to all the different agencies. And we also always like this study. We always start internally with a goal of making it something that we share externally. Because our goal is, I need you to think about this about communication. If only we understand this, that doesn't really help us because we still have to deal with the client that also has to understand it and all the different stakeholders. So that is our approach, essentially. It's to work with our internal resources and democratize it around the organization, and then democratize it with all stakeholders that we work to make sure that there's alignment. And it's a term that I always use, is make sure that we're using unified language and unified approach in doing that work.
Can I just add, I think you bring up a really good point because a lot of our operating principles are really outdated or they need to change. And I think the media landscape makes this very complicated because, we talk to strategists and creatives. We can change the strategy based on this data and the creative. But the media placement, you could have really terrible creative, frankly, and place it in the right place, and it's going to do what it needs to do, right? And so I think you bring up a really good point for us to think about in saying, is the first step, the data leads to the exposure of what's broken. And so if they really can understand how broken it is, maybe then we can do something different about the process and the operational side, because they need to be informed with, well, we're telling you that this isn't working and this is what you're missing. But I don't think anybody's telling them, just saying it's not working isn't enough. And so I think that's the intersection of what's needed next, is that we have more, what we're trying to identify is the proof that it's not, because right now it's hard to prove that, I think especially on the media side. So thank you for that question. I think it's really helpful.
One more add. Our consultancy work is all research-backed. We conduct our own research, so every piece of feedback or strategy that we provide to brands and corporations is based on research, which hopefully, it encourages folks to listen to us, not based on just lived experiences, but data as well.
One thing I think I would love to add as well is diversifying the research steps that you also have. Is what we're doing at Understory is right now we're flying on Saturday to India actually to work with Indigenous communities to archive their knowledge and then use it in a Gen AI to make sure that data sets that are being used in creative brand campaigns, et cetera, are coming from diversified knowledge sets, not just what's available on open source data use, et cetera. Because right now I think the access to the most marginalized is not possible. So what we're doing at Understory is trying to bridge that link with real research and data from localized communities. So I think adding that into the conversation as well to get a good end product is what we need to be doing as well.
That's great. Yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Because okay.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I lost my voice.
Oh, we're all struggling a little bit. It's okay.
So my name is Denise Aguilar, and I live in Seattle. I actually work for, or I'm the board of the Latin Grammy Culture Foundation. And I've had this pending question for actually almost 2 years, and I've yet to receive a solid answer. So a little bit of context, I wrote a piece on Univision about having diversity on boards. Duh. And I tied it back to ROI, sales. But what I find frustrating, especially in the midst of these mass layoffs, especially in tech, when our friends are applying for jobs in the EEOO form, there's no intersectionality. And even more frustrating, and Carol, thank you for even sharing your background. Every time I personally apply, it's like Black or Latino, but there's no in between.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, I don't have the data, but I would love to find it. I believe, my theory is, because people aren't checking the boxes that are actually appropriate to them, therefore they are not seen. So I would love to know your just open-ended thoughts around this, because I'm always trying to find an answer for that specific problem.
Are you talking about the form when you're applying to a job? or
Correct,
the-
and then they use that data to then say, oh, we have these groups, but then they're targeting even the intersectional groups, and then they're complaining. They meaning companies, that they're not hitting certain sales. But my theory has always been, if you represent those that you're reaching out to, therefore, you'll have those sales. But if we go back to the original, the form, we don't even have that captured either.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is so frustrating. That form is a very old, antiquated, regulated space. Like you can't be Black and Hispanic, but that is an issue around a definition of race versus ethnicity, and we could talk about that too. But it's interesting you bring. This is so fascinating, and the way we think about the work we do at IPG. So that is almost like a check the box exercise to have that form, right? When you're applying for a job, you're not required to answer those questions when you're applying, and then you have to have a box checked because in the United States we have to report EEO1. It's required. So those boxes must be completed at some point, whether you did it yourself or someone checked it for you.
Oh, wow.
That's standard because we are federally regulated to report. That is a compliance process. That is standard. So if you look at what is their ethos and philosophy around identity, measuring identity, understanding their workforce, that is a separate conversation. So at IPG, we have designed our own self-ID process that's outside of that EEO form. I don't really care if people complete the EEO form or not. I don't care what the government thinks about who we have in our organization. I care about the data we have, and that self-ID form has been uniquely designed to be global, to be inclusive, for you to tell us how you want us to identify you. It may not be how you identify with your friends. It may not be how you identify outside of this office. It's how you're telling me you want me to identify you here. So I think one piece is a very regulatory, think about it as a compliance exercise. And then I think the other piece is that organization's view on how they identify and measure identity, really, and that they're not always the same conversation. The other reality of that, too, is that not every organization is in a place of self-ID. Some have not evolved to that place yet. But they may not be using that data from that EEO form in the way that you think that they are, because we're not. I hope that's helpful, because I don't use that information.
Nikki, I think.
I'm wondering if folks are feeling safe to fill out that information, participate in self-ID right now. Like, if I am a part of a marginalized community that is undervalued, seemingly undervalued, why would I tell you that I'm disabled or I'm queer?
Yeah.
Like, that feels unsafe right now. So
I think that's fair. And I don't know, we just went to a new HR system. So folks are kind of doing this again for the first time in a random time of year. So we're seeing kind of an uptick because it's an entirely new system. But I think that we've seen a lot of seasons and periods where people felt unsafe, whether they weren't answering it because they didn't know what you were going to do with that information. And then we've seen periods of time where people are really eager to answer because they want to be very bold and audacious about who they are. And so I think there are ebbs and flows with that all the time that we're trying to manage and ensure that people are safe and that safety is a #1 priority. I think a lot of people are feeling unsafe about their personal data in general, given the social, political environment, given, you know, a lack of protections around data and tech. And they feel like brands have been lying to them, and I think people feel like their workplaces have been too, depending on if you work for these places that have, removed certain commitments. So it is super challenging.
There's something that I was saying when we came right out of the pandemic. Part of the problem that we have is that we really are a very distracted place, and we've placed our priorities in the wrong places for a long time. So we've left behind things that have to do with education, infrastructure, and you see that in not all countries, but many countries. So what you're making reference to is an infrastructure problem of how organizations would have evolved these conversations in a way that it was built into the overall framework. And Crystal and I were talking, I'm also a framework person. So those kinds of things, that's why what Shannon was saying, it's dated. And the truth is that it does have real implications. I mean, I'm a true, that actually happened to me when I finished undergrad. I was accepted to Columbia Law School, and the scholarship that I applied to, I clicked in that one that I was Black. And for some reason, I guess maybe somewhere else I put that I was Latino. So they called me, and this was like months before it was time for me to head to school. And they said, so are you Black or Latino? I said, well, I'm both. And they said, well, if you're both, you can't have the scholarship. They said, because this scholarship is for Blacks, it's not for Latinos. And they made
that is
this
crazy.
Yeah, this is a true story. But then I wouldn't be here having a great time with y'all if I was an attorney, right?
Let the ancestors lead.
We've had a few attorneys on the stage, Carol.
No, but I'm just saying I would. So I take everything in grace. But I'm just saying that this self-description of mine was immediately removed a scholarship, and we tried to talk to them. And they said no. They say this scholarship is funded for Black students, not for Latinos. So all to say is that we do have to evolve that intersectionality, if you may, of even backgrounds, because it has real, repercussions on the lives of people. And I think that if we were to focus more on those things, then I think we can fix those basic frameworks.
We have the same issue with Asian. Like, we know how big Asia is.
Yes.
I mean, come on. So we've broken that out as well.
Oh, that's
I mean,
good.
you can't, like, I wasn't learning anything to know that 30% of our population identified as Asian. I have no idea what that means. I could not tell you.
It's a continent.
Yeah. Oh, we're talking about an entire continent.
Yes.
But some states are changing. Like, California has changed theirs. I mean, even gender. I mean, you can't report EEO with non-binary gender. It's male or female.
Yeah.
It's like every one of the organization has to have a male or female check box that's checked. That is required. Well, then we measure internally in a different way. And so I think that's incredibly frustrating for people.
So first of all, thank you. And we pulled your slides up, so we're going to go back to the beginning and go through some of the data. But we're at a point now, and I think we all have felt a level of uncomfortableness, of concern. How do we push this forward? Because a lot of, when you talk about the classifications of people, these are policies. These are governmental policies. And I'm a big advocate of you need to get involved in our political system. Yes. Whether you're voting, you're supporting candidates, you're authoring legislation, whatever it may be. But on the workplace side, how are we educating companies, brands? Because this is a new vocabulary. It's a new language. Many of the people who are sitting in seats of power are older, who are like, you're either a man or you're a woman. I don't get the gay thing. I don't get this. I don't get that. Can we just make it simple? How are we educating them? Because I don't think, in my heart of hearts, and this is my personal opinion, it's necessarily a issue of them being against something. They're just unaware. And it often doesn't happen until it shows up in their own family. And when it shows up in their own family, like, oh, well, my white son married a Latino woman, or he married a Black woman, or vice versa. And then all of a sudden the light bulb goes off. But how are we starting to equip people with access to the information to start to tackle this. When I look at Gen Z, has a completely different viewpoint, gets it, understands it. But when you go up the food chain to us Gen Xers and old folks, we're like, don't quite get it, not opposed to it, but I just don't know. How do we help people past that point?
Connected to money. They care about money. So, I mean, like, that's why we talk about us being a growth market segment and, profitability, the ability to grow audiences and engage audiences. We just frame it in a business case that they care about. And then eventually, like, we're still getting the same impact. We're just speaking their language.
One thing I would love to add to that is when I was younger in my career, I actually worked at Deciem, which is known for their products like The Ordinary, NEOD, etc. And I was hired as their first global social impact and sustainability person. It was before the Estee Lauder acquisition. And I had come in and created the global social impact strategy and a few other pillars. And Estee Lauder was becoming a major stakeholder. They're like, what are you doing? We don't understand this language. But then I explained to them that we have some key stakeholders, which are our consumers, the rest of our investors, and then our founder who had recently passed, and he was an immigrant. So it was like, he cares about his communities. We should start a community fund in his honor, and this is what it would mean in terms of, brand awareness, community engagement, etc. They bought into that data, the numbers, they loved it. They're like, okay, kickstart the impact fund. But again, it was just a conversations of number, showing them that capital runs where, DEI runs, where impact runs, etc. But then came the question of where some of our donations were going. And I did step down from that role once Estee Lauder fully acquired Deciem because of some sentiment issues. But yeah, it was all about education, having the conversations and presenting the data, because again, I think where impact flows, where purpose flows, profit also flows. So just having those conversations and also open dialogues. I think when I was younger in the UN spaces or even in these corporate spaces, often being the youngest in the room, I would have to have a mentor or someone come with me to support. But, just having, pairing myself with people would help. But I think perhaps older audiences, choosing someone younger in the Gen Z audience, being a sponsor, saying, hey, we hear you, you have the data, you have the experience, come with me in this room and let's change the narrative or have that conversation. I think that intergenerational dialogue also helps a lot.
I love that. You said the magic words for me because we're all about transformative dialogues here. It's the long culture conversations. Yeah. Go ahead, Kara.
Patricia Corsi, who is the Chief Growth Officer for Kimberly-Clark, said something at our inclusion breakfast yesterday that resonated with something that I've said before, when she talked about how she doesn't really, and this is not verbatim, but she was speaking to how when she wakes up and does what she does, she's thinking about doing the right thing for the work and for the business, rather than necessarily how does that compromise her work or not. And that is something that and I share that because it's an observation that I've made. I think that for many years I've noticed that people want to protect their job more than they want to do the right thing. And that's a generalization. So a lot of the times when they are in those rooms where they could be impactful and transformational, they're holding back that one sentence that would make that campaign include others. They're holding back because their number one goal is alignment. And that's when Patricia said that, and Sharon, you know this when you asked me about my personality and being outspoken, Cassandra knows this, I've actually never done that in my entire life. I say the day that I will do the worst job I've ever done in my life is the day that my paycheck determines my behavior in the workplace. That's the day that I'm no longer good for that role because I've allowed myself to be dictated by something bigger than a purpose of why I'm there, and the trust and belief in my own skills and understanding of why I would advocate for that work, right? So I think that when you ask that question, it's not about telling people just say whatever. That's not it. It's about creating spaces where you build agency so that the best ideas come to the table, and then by means of collaboration, you will see the strongest work. But so I do believe that when that doesn't happen, I think that whether it's a leadership or self-imposed fear that individuals might bring to the table, I think that that's where why these why this doesn't advance is because I think we're connected to that too much. And if we look at some of when I was younger in my career, I read a lot of books of the people that I would want to see myself emulate. And I always tell people, who have you ever seen that was great, that was motivated by fear or intimidation? Because I've never seen one. Right? So if your real goal is to be great and transformational and to utilize your greatest skills, then you must first practice courage every day. You know, and courage that is tactful, that is educated and well-informed.
And I think there's a way to do that in the workplace. And I think, you know, our role as DEI practitioners and leaders at IPG is to create systems that allow those things to come together. And so this looked like, I'd say years ago, incentivizing, you know, DEI in some way around metrics. That was usually where we started. You know, I think our philosophy is like, yes, we know that not everybody is equipped or has the knowledge or is aware or we all came from different communities and different backgrounds. We don't have time to shame people for what they don't know. Like, we don't have time for that. So what we are going to do is we're going to create opportunities for you to evolve, for you to grow, for you not to say that you don't know. We're going to give you the information, and then we're also going to hold you accountable to being able to lead courageously, to be curious, to lead diverse teams. And then we're going to equip you with tools to do that really, really well. So we're going to inform you, we're going to give you tools to practice it, we're going to give you a time horizon to improve, and then we're going to rate you on that performance. And built into your evaluation as an effective leader is going to include these competencies that you can't excuse that you didn't know how to lead a team of 25-year-olds, that you didn't know how to work with someone that spoke a different language, that you couldn't figure out how to accommodate your workplace for a person who's disabled on your team. You can't get out of that. You've been informed, you've been guided, you have help from our team, you've been advised, and you're held accountable for it as well.
All right, so you're going to help us. How do we help you? The research is out now. All of these amazing people are in the audience who are going to take action, because I'm all about making change happen. How do we help you get this out? Because it has to go beyond IPG. Like, people in this room have access to other media outlets, social, other organizations, other companies. Do we host another conversation in other cities where you share this research? Because the not knowing is very dangerous in this current climate.
One of it is that this is an evolving project. We started off with Mintel, then we brought in GLAAD Media Institute and understanding of that. So it's really about, from your platform, like when I was talking to Crystal earlier, then she comes from a digital perspective of it. So the truth is that this will be solved by means of that collaboration. And it's you looking at what you have in your toolbox and saying, how can I add to this conversation? Because it's a very complex conversation that affects every industry, every discipline. So I think that it's that, and we've already built, once again, that space of collaboration. It's already there. So all you would be is adding yourself to a group that thinks this is important. I don't know if that makes sense, because we're not going to say no to anyone that wants to help us continue to have this and it's always, I think also we have to be a little bit selfless. This is not the project that's going to help you, get the big bang for your buck up front. But I think we're going to get it in the long run, So that's just my short answer.
Another thing that could be helpful for those that work in brands or with brands, if you want to loop us into a conversation to support you with the data and the information, you're working on a challenge, they won't believe you, you are worried, like, please do not go down this road. It is not going to work. And we have information that can help that. Reach out to us and we could support you in that way. And then I think global conversations are really important. So if you are in another market outside of the US, I think having this conversation is also really critical. I just gave Carol 3 extra jobs. But
No, but in summary, like what we talked about with the group, this is not an interpublic problem, or
right.
This is something that we all need to collectively solve for, right? So look at it like that. If you take ownership of it, it's something that we can literally all do something about it.
Other questions from the audience? I know I've had my fair share. Others? All right. Well, I can't thank you ladies enough. This was fantastic. We're going to just go through some of the slides just so people can see them, and everyone can go upstairs into the cool air. Once again, we've got food, we've got beverages, but I really want us to continue the conversation talk about how do we make it happen in all of our respective areas of work in our respective communities, because I fundamentally believe this is the most critical thing we could be doing as we make it to this halfway point of the year. So thank you. So give this panel a huge round of applause.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Happy Pride, happy Juneteenth.